Let me just okay, we are now recording. Great. So welcome, everybody, for our third webinar with Tasleem Damji, who's a board member of Boys and Girls Clubs of Ottawa and also a psychologist, and has graciously accepted to sit with us for 3 weeks in a row to go over how we can support young people when they're being lured or when they into negative, really negative behavior and extremism. And also when they feel like when they're getting more and more isolated, how can we intervene to support them? So this week it's all about everybody who's called in, I think. Tasleem, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Thank you for coming back if you're back, and thank you for being here if you're new. Any questions that you have from either last week or the week before? I know that I'd asked last week for, if you could, to bring in some of your stories and concerns. So if you have any, this would be a great time, because really I'm here to help guide you in whatever you may be experiencing.
I just have a quick comment, I guess. This is Debbie. I missed last week.
Yep.
Is there anything from last week that would put this week's topics that you're going to cover in perspective? Is there anything that I missed that I would do?
Well, what we did last week was I kind of went over again just what we had learned the first week, but I had shown another video clip. So the first week I'd shown a video clip of a white supremacist, or a person going down the white supremacist path. And then what I did last week was showed a video from the UK about a young male who had gone down the violent extremist path of the Al-Qaeda narrative. And really was to highlight the similarities between both in terms of what are the vulnerabilities and then what were some of the behaviors that person was displaying, and kind of briefly touched on what kind of support could have been provided or who could have been in those persons' lives. Because again, if we strip away the ideology, the pathways are really similar and some of the vulnerabilities are very similar. So today what we'll do is I'll listen to take any questions and listen to any kind of concerns that you, like any of you may have experienced in your work, and then I'll also do another case study. So that'll kind of hopefully wrap it up. Does that help?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And for those who missed, I did record last week's sessions. I'm just trying to figure out how to get that to you. So I'll, as a follow-up to this meeting, I will send you all the information that Tasleem has shared and the 2 recordings that we'll have. We didn't record the first one, but there's a PowerPoint. So there you go.
So anyone feeling brave enough this morning or this afternoon? No one has any stories? All right, so what I'll do is I'll go through a story that I'll share with you. And the pictures that I have up on the screen, again, I just want to reiterate and highlight again that it is a process. Someone isn't born to do this. There's things in their lives that kind of happen, and they go down a path, and at every process, I really believe that there are opportunities for us to help and provide support, whether it's at the early stages, whether it's at the middle stages, even after they potentially commit a crime. There is always support and help that we can provide. The person that I have up on screen is Damien Claremont. He was born in, I'll go through his story, but he's Canadian born, and his last, I guess, stomping grounds in Canada were in Calgary before he left for Syria. So what I'm going to do is I have taken his story all from open source material. and I have broken it up into what I saw as 3 kind of different phases in his life. And I'm going to go through each phase with you. And what I'm going to do after every phase is I will be asking kind of some of the vulnerabilities that you see and maybe what you see in your line of work, what kind of support could have been provided at each stage, and maybe who in your networks you could have maybe had asked for this person. Okay? Does that sound okay? Okay. So excuse me while I read. I had changed his name, so I'm just going to stick to whatever name I have on here, only because sometimes when I do this, I'm very sensitive to his family, and with his mother, I had a chance to meet with her, and I would hate for any sort of documentation lying around with his name on it. Even though it's open source, it's still sensitive. So I just kind of changed his name. So I called him John. Okay, so John was born in Nova Scotia into an Acadian French-Canadian Catholic family. Neither he nor his family were very religious. As a child, he was interested in sports growing up. His grandfather remembers taking him skating every Sunday and singing to him as a boy. Although John didn't like school very much, he spent a lot of his time reading. When he was 6 or 7, he moved to Calgary with his parents, whom later divorced. He would visit Nova Scotia and would reconnect with one of his best friends. Through the years, the 2 boys would keep in close contact. His friend described John as having a new persona every time they would see each other. One year, he looked like a rapper in a baseball cap and baggy basketball clothes. The next, he was dressed like a fashion model. For a while, he'd considered joining the military. It seemed like he was trying to find himself, according to his friend. In school, he was athletic, smart, and fluent in both French and English. His mom describes her son as an extremely gifted kid, but had lots of emotional issues and trouble in being accepted by other kids. During his teen years, he had a lot of personal anguish that included him dropping out of school at the age of 14 years. He would barely leave his house between the ages of 15 and 17. One day at the age of 17, he left a note saying his life wasn't worth living and was found by police passed out after drinking antifreeze. He spent 2 months in a hospital. Following his release from hospital, he lived in a group home, saw a psychiatrist, went on medication, and was arrested for trying to buy ecstasy. John struggled with drugs and alcohol and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder during his teen years. So for me, this was phase 1. So are there any things in there that you saw that might lend himself to be vulnerable to violent messaging or any kind of negative messaging?
Well, just the fact that he was trying to find an identity for himself, you know? And
yes. Are there other things that you see?
I think he was just looking for a support group of some sort, like when he'd reinvent himself year after year after year. There really wasn't much discussion in what you had said about the parents divorcing and stuff like that. If there was more information leading us to a different direction, then maybe people could say more about it, but that could put him at risk too.
Yes. So the fact that he didn't have a stable home environment, maybe?
Right.
Yes. Anything else in there that you see or heard?
Well, support for his being bipolar, sure, like he has mental health issues, and so if he doesn't get that proper support, then it makes him especially vulnerable.
Yes. What about the fact that he moved to a different city?
I agree. I think it does. It's a big factor. Like growing up in Nova Scotia and then going to Calgary is culture shock.
Yes.
Very much so. It's a different way of life on both ends of Canada, and yeah, I think picking up and leaving because of a family crisis, it didn't help him any.
That's right. Are there things in there that could have grounded him, that were good for him?
I think maybe his network of friends that he had in Nova Scotia, like the one that, you know, was his best friend, if you want to say that.
Yes.
Maybe if he was involved in some sports, team sports and stuff like that.
Yes. So clearly from his story, there were things, and again, the reason I want to highlight what you all have said about, the move and looking for an identity and, problems at home and not fitting in, because this is really at the early stages. It doesn't mean that a child who moves or a child who comes from a divorced family is going to be a terrorist, right? But there are things in those situations that can lead them to be sad or confused or lonely or angry. And if we can reach out at the very, very early stages and provide support and just be in tune, then it just leads them, or it just provides them an opportunity to avoid a world of hurt later on if possible. So the goals of understanding it at the early stages doesn't mean that there's a leap from that to violence, but there is things happening right now at this moment in this person's life where we can all reach out. So the fact that he left school at the age of 14, even though he was very smart, there's something happening. For me, I would be asking questions. What happened at school that would make you want to leave, especially because you're so smart? Was he bored? Was he bullied? And of course, the newspaper stories aren't going to give you all those details. And you're not going to get that from news stories either when you're working with kids. It's about connecting with them and about asking, are there changes happening in this person's behaviors that would kind of tweak you and say, well, maybe I need to reach out and maybe I need to just have a conversation and see where this person's at. Is that making sense? So even if the person was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, it's not till much later, so there probably were behavioral changes in him or that were happening to him that maybe just didn't fit in even though he was diagnosed later. So there were lots of different, I don't want to say the word clues, but there were lots of things happening to him that people could have maybe, and I don't know if they did or if they don't, because of course the news stories don't say, but if this was happening in your clubhouses now, there would be things that this young man, this young boy would have been displaying at the clubhouses. Right? Either maybe it's distancing, or maybe it was variedness in his behavior, or just the different personas he kept on. There was something happening to him that there were clues, and maybe people just didn't piece it together to say, well, maybe he needs help. And I don't know if he got help or not, but I'm just saying if this person was in your clubhouse right now, at the very, very early stages, it would be a great opportunity to just reach out, as you do all the time, and just say, hey, John, what's happening with you? Are you okay? Are you, are things, how are things at home? Whatever the normal things you guys do to reach out would be exactly what you would be doing with John at this point. Yeah? Are you okay with moving on to phase 2? Okay. At the age of 17 years, John converted to Islam and seemed to have settled down. The anger and substance abuse had decreased. Islam gave him a kind of stability and helped with his drug and alcohol dependency. It also helped with his depression and suicidal ideation. His family and friends saw a positive change in him. For example, when John would speak to his friend about the calming effect it had on him, his friend was very happy for him. John had said that he had finally found something that brought him peace and compared it to what they had done when they were doing martial arts together as kids. After issues in school and a suicide attempt, John sought medical attention and started to see a psychiatrist. He was placed on a disability pension. Despite holding some basic jobs for short periods, he lived largely off a disability pension that a psychiatrist had recommended he apply for after he was released from the hospital following a suicide attempt. At the age of 20 years, John moved out of his family home and was now living in a boarding house. He met a new prayer group whom he would hang out with and do activities like hiking. He starts becoming more private and closed off from his family. According to his mother, he became more secretive, isolated, angry, and political. He believed in 9/11 conspiracy theories and said the media weren't telling the truth about what was happening to Muslims around the world. He didn't allow her to meet any of his new friends. When his friend from Nova Scotia moved to Calgary in 2011 and stayed at the home of John's mother, he felt that John had become preachy and judgmental. There was also an arrogance about him where he felt that he was the better Muslim. Unemployed and living off a disability pension, John started talking about moving to a Muslim country where he could belong. He started talking more about world politics, what was happening in Syria and the Middle East, and how nothing was being done to help them. John was involved in extremist websites that supported statements that contained messaging from people like Anwar al-Awlaki. And I will explain does anybody know who he is? He was part of one of the really big leaders of the Al-Qaeda network. He, U.S. citizen, really, really thoughtful in his speech, really eloquent, really charming in his speech. He was killed. But his videos, I think, have now been taken off. But during the time when they were available, it starts off as a soft spell about, what the West is doing against Muslims, and then it becomes a bit more of a harder approach. But he was very eloquent. A lot of people gravitated towards what he was saying. Okay. John appeared to be rejecting some of the values of democratic society. He did not believe that Canada was being fair to Muslims across Canada. He believed that Canadian military were responsible for killing of innocent persons, including children. When his childhood friend would talk to John about wanting to join the military, John would plead for him to not enlist because, quote, the Canadian military was killing Muslims like him, unquote. In November 2012, he told his mother he was going to Egypt to study Islam. The night before he was supposed to leave, in November, the family went out for dinner, and he came back to her townhouse and played video games with his little brother. John's contact with his mother became increasingly infrequent as time passed, and his text messages became angrier about Canada. Although he told his mother he was going abroad to study, he actually went to Syria to fight. His mother said that he changed progressively as time passed abroad. Whereas in the early days he would tell her he missed her cooking, and that he loved her, he became increasingly distant and cold. He would tell her to accept his decision and that he wasn't coming home. So that's phase 2. Can anybody tell me about some of the changes that you're hearing about? Can you sense a hardening in him? A distancing?
People are on mute. I mean, there's a lot there, like changing friends and isolating himself and I think like the disability pension seems to have contributed to isolation when you're holding down the job, when you're seeing people who aren't just the people you pray with, then at least you have a broader network. It's harder to have an us and them kind of feeling if you're connected to different networks. So
yes,
you can see that it would be a concerning,
yes,
helpful move.
Yeah, I would say yes from a psychological perspective. I'm not sure what the psychiatrist was thinking, but if somebody had come to me, if a teenager had come to me, and the last thing I would want is for them to be isolated from friends and family or from structure or stability. So yeah, that was definitely not necessarily the best advice given.
I think his initial move, moving out of the family home and reaching out, that's a critical stage in anybody's life. Doesn't matter whether you're going to extremism or not. So that's a pivotal point. And meeting with a new prayer group, leaving the other one behind, and becoming more secretive. And he kept his family and friends away from his new group of his prayer group.
Right.
And then becoming an arrogant Muslim, like you said, I don't know how to put that politically correct when, he wasn't born Muslim. He's adopted that cultural belief, and then he's becoming more arrogant in something that he's adapted to himself.
Yes.
And then getting involved in the websites and extremism that way, and just overall his rejection of democratic society, and then lying to his parents about where he actually was. He wasn't studying in Egypt. In fact, he was fighting in Syria.
No, absolutely. So if a child comes home and starts becoming more secretive about their friend group, or about becoming more arrogant in whatever they're thinking, right?
Right. This is very similar where, if we want to talk about like online predators, where they drive a wedge between the victims and the family. That's what exactly happened here.
No, that's exactly what happens. I was just reading a news story this morning about how terrorist groups like ISIL, for example, spend more money, like they pay their media communication strategists probably double, triple more than what they pay their fighters. Because they
don't spare any costs, whatever it takes.
That's right. So you're right. It is like child luring. It is grooming. It is about making that person feel special and making them keep a secret.
Yeah, especially when he was already of the feeling that there was nobody there for him.
That's right. So lots of studies, too, that show that religion is actually a very, it's a positive, for the most part, a positive thing in people's life, regardless of the religion, because it actually does provide things like hope for the future, a belief in a higher power, belief that help can be provided if things are going wrong in a person's life. So when he first converted to Islam, it actually was really good for him. It brought him that calmness that he needed. It's when he met a different group of friends, and the negative peer group, that was the issue. It wasn't the religion, it was the peer group that he ended up meeting.
Right.
Right. So you're right. It's about the grooming. It is about negative peer influence. It is about the secrecy. And there's so much more. The anger is coming out again, right? But his anger is now being channeled. Whereas maybe, if you think about his first phase, I could see there might have been anger about his family situation, and maybe when he internalized it through the substance abuse and the suicide attempt, he now has a way to channel his anger externally and for a different, something outside of himself.
Also fulfills his sense of purpose in terms of what that he was looking for before. Now there's more of a sense of, I guess, identifying with a group, and maybe if he's traveling for, he has a purpose.
Absolutely. Their recruiting strategy is really slick. So they're similar to child luring in the sense of the secrecy, the grooming, the making them feel special, connecting with them on a personal level. I mean, they're really quite advanced in this, just like child molesters. And the thing that they add on that maybe child molesters don't is a sense of a higher purpose, right? That there is a cause bigger than them that would make them almost immortal, right? So that's an added layer that child lurers don't do, because they make that about the individual. But now in this recruiting process, they make it about bigger than who they are. But they still create that sense of arrogance, that your cause, your beliefs, your actions are justifiable, justified, and morally just. Is everybody with me so far? All right, phase 3. When John was in Syria, he would have conversations with his childhood friend. Although John never mentioned what he was specifically doing, he told his friend, "I am where I am because I believe in something." He told his mother that his life wasn't about material things, that he wanted to do something productive with his life, and that the afterlife was more important. John's mom contacted Mohammed Robert Heft. He's an anti-radicalization counselor who works with new converts and serves as a liaison between the Muslim community and CSIS. He spoke with John for a year on the phone, trying to persuade him to come home. However, he didn't. On January 2014, CBC reports that Free Syrian Army forces have killed John during rebel infighting. John was fighting with a group called Jabhat al-Nusra, an al-Qaeda-affiliated rebel group consisting of largely foreign extremists. Jabhat al-Nusra was designated as a terrorist group by the Canadian government in 2013. The first public indication of John's death came on social media when a Twitter account claiming to be run by a rebel fighter who knew John tweeted his death. During an interview after her son's death, his mother stated to the National Post, quote, "In his heart, he was helping women and children. That would be John. He always believed in helping others," unquote. In a CBC article dated June 2014, an imam stated, "We have always made it clear to our community that radical ideologies that attempt to justify murder and suicide bombings are incompatible with the teachings of Islam." Everybody remembered his warmth and protective love for his mother and 3 children, and his 3 siblings. Any thoughts at this point?
It sounds like he was reflecting that he already knew that the end was near, that his time had come. And he was just reflecting, calling his friends, talking his childhood friends that, basically he had somewhat isolated. And then, thinking about the afterlife as being more important as his living life.
Yes. There is a very compelling narrative if you think about that your afterlife is eternal, and there's glory, and there's peace, and there's joy, and whatever else you can sprinkle on that seems good, that the pain of today can be gone in your afterlife. It's pretty compelling it sounds really compelling regardless of whether you've had a challenging upbringing or not. But it sounds even more special if you've had a painful life.
To me, it resembles like suicidal ideation as well, because it's valuing the end over the present and over your life. valuing death more than your life. And so, I mean, it's a transformation. It's like suicidal ideation, but for a purpose. But it's still, to me, very just giving up on life.
You know, it's interesting with this case. Like, so when you hear about the martyrs, right? When you hear about them, the narrative of the martyr, and in Arabic it's called shaheed. So anytime, so when we were watching the Isa video last week, and he was talking about becoming a shaheed. Shaheed is a martyr. It's almost the opposite of giving up on life, actually, because they've made their life more glorified, in essence. So he was actually, so John, Damien, was actually planning on getting married and having a family. Like, they all go not necessarily wanting to die, but accepting that if they do, then it's for a glorified reason. So in his death, there was more meaning, a more valued meaning, a more glorified existence in his death than in his life. But he was actually building a life there. If you hear news stories, or if you ever see news stories of the compounds and the when they've taken over cities or villages and they take over, they're actually building a state. It's not that they're all willing to, it's not that they're all wanting to give up their life. They're actually trying to build what they think is a better life, is the life. But they are learning, they are adopting the belief system that if their life is lost for the cause, then that's a good thing. So if you think about his 3 phases, and if you ever think about trying to have conversations with somebody, where do you think it would be the easiest to start having conversations?
I think at the end.
At the end?
He seems more calmed and relaxed.
Yes.
Not as aggressive. It's almost that there's like a common sense returning to him.
Yeah.
Not being judgmental, or maybe still a little bit arrogant, but not to the extreme he was before.
I would have said the opposite. Like, it's much easier to talk to somebody for a Boys and Girls Club or a Big Brothers and Big Sisters to reach out to someone who's just moved to a new city and make them feel like they belong. Whereas it's hard to intervene when somebody's so attached to their new identity, like when they found that sense of belonging. It's hard to shake that, shift it.
I would think it's probably easier at the beginning, because he's still not, he's kind of lost, and you all have an opportunity to kind of help him find a place. At the very end, when Robert Heft was trying to help him, I think there are still opportunities to have conversations with Damien at the end, like there were. But I would also be looking at now, part of what research shows in this whole field, just like in gangs, is that there's a network influence. So if he was vulnerable and susceptible, I would be looking at his siblings and reaching out to his siblings as well. So especially after he died, there's a big vacuum in the family. If I was a caregiver, if their siblings were also coming to the clubs, I would definitely be reaching out to the siblings, not because of worrying about the pathway, but because they've now experienced a loss. And there's going to be everything that goes with grief, the confusion, the anger, the sadness. And again, it's about reaching out, it's about connecting, and if his siblings idolized him, there is a potential that they would idolize his cause and why he died as well. So there's just all that to kind of keep in the back of your mind. But it always goes back to me about having conversations and whether, if you look at this, if you look at his photos on the screen, whether it's at the bottom photo where he's wearing his Mickey Mouse shirt or at the top, all of those phases, there were distinct things happening in his life, and there was always, always opportunities to reach out and have conversations. Does that make sense? Could you see the us and them kind of thinking that was starting to take shape as he progressed down the pathway? Right? The us versus them, the black and white thinking that he is right, everybody else is wrong.
That's a powerful feeling. People come to it like in different ways. When you're like conspiracy theory as well, it's the sense that that small minority of you really get it and everybody else doesn't. So it's a very compelling, for radicalism, but also in everyday life sometimes, like it's a compelling feeling. You can see why it would be attractive to a young man who's trying to find himself.
Oh, yes. Like even if we think about, anybody here from Hamilton? No?
There was at the first session, Mila.
Oh, I was going to say sorry because, we're going to the Grey Cup. But even if you think about sports teams, when you think about, the Stanley Cup or the Grey Cup, or they always show stories of their players and the compelling stories, and there's people who kind of root for the champions, and then there's those who root for the underdog. Right? There's compelling stories to root for the underdog and want them to win. Right? And if you belong to that, it is very powerful if it's the David-Goliath kind of scenario. And that's how really they portray themselves. They portray themselves as the David trying to go up against, the Goliath that is the West that has been oppressing them, in their belief system. So, yeah, it is a very compelling narrative to be a part of that. So how would you challenge, maybe challenge isn't the right word, how would you have conversations with Damien at whatever stage that you're encountering him at? What would you want to say? What would you want to do? Who would you want to bring in to help if you needed to? Let's stop at the early stage, when he just moved. So you have a kid from Nova Scotia who moves to Calgary, and he joins the Boys and Girls Club or the Big Brothers and Sisters in Calgary. What would you do?
I know there's a gang of Calgary people somewhere.
It doesn't have to be Calgary if they don't want to be put on the spot. But if you have a new kid who joins your club, what would you do?
You're going to make sure that they know what services are out there, what's available to them.
Like what?
Like the Boys and Girls Club, we do a lot of after-school stuff and all that stuff on the weekends, so make sure that they know other things in the community. You want to do a really good job of connecting them, right? Making them feel welcome, making them feel connected.
Okay. Anybody else do different things? Similar things?
We just might connect them with a member that's been with us for a while, just so that, that member can introduce them to a new peer group and different things that are going on within the club.
Mm-hmm. How would you make them feel welcome?
I think that's just a matter of checking in every now and again, seeing how they're doing, even though, you've paired them up with somebody.
Yep.
Right? And, at the end of the night, asking them how their night was, did they enjoy themselves, finding out what their interests were, you know, certainly sharing information in regards to other things that maybe are happening on other nights.
Mm-hmm. How would you know if there were things that just weren't right or were off a little bit with him or her?
I think that would take some time to develop that relationship. And it might not necessarily be through the staffing component. It may be through his peer group or her peer group.
So in the beginning stages, if there's someone new, would you ask about their family or what brought them to a new city, or is it, like, would any of that be done? I don't know.
That would probably be done pretty informally.
Yeah.
And stuff, because, you know, certainly we wouldn't want the kids to feel like we were prying, right?
No.
You know, if you're trying to make them feel welcomed, right? But I think, you know, I think those are just sort of generalized comments that we would ask of anybody, any new member, whether they're a new member to the city or whether they're just a new member to the club.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, you know, there's the whole welcoming and the atmosphere is really fantastic. I mean, when my kids go to the Boys and Girls Club in Ottawa, I remember taking them probably a couple of years ago. There was, I don't know if there was an event or something, but they hadn't been to the club before. And my kids walk in, and they're a bit, well, my younger one's not shy, but my older one's a bit shyer. But they walk in, and there were all these great kids who came up to them and instantly kind of brought them into the fold and took them in and showed them the different activities and just really made them feel welcome, even though they were strangers. And I thought it was fantastic with, and I'm sure you all do that, with the environment of creating this acceptance and this safeness and just sharing. It was really fantastic. So all of that are really, really great strengths that you all have. And I wouldn't ever underestimate or minimize what you do offer in that. So say you know John and he comes in and he's new and you've now made him feel welcome. Time passes and you start noticing things are a little bit not right. What would you do?
I guess it would depend on what's not right, right? So, you know, in regards to contacting a family or contacting, you know, Children's Aid Society or whatever, all depending on what's considered off, would then be in your course of action.
So give me some things of what you may see that seem off, and then how would you kind of investigate it? Investigate's not the right word, but how would you kind of figure out what's happening?
I'd have to think about that. I guess, you know, I mean, it could be something like, you know, just somebody having self-esteem issues, like I don't have any friends and nobody, you know, just being here but being isolated while they're here. And then delving into that a little more in regards to why do they feel that way and why aren't they participating and stuff. And those, you know, once again, too, if you don't have that relationship developed, you're not going to get those answers.
Right. So you get a sense from, so some of the issues may feel like they're just not fitting in, or they're feeling like they're not confident enough to make friends, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah. Other challenges people have experienced?
Imagine that if a young person's very engaged and participating in activities and all of a sudden there's a withdrawal, where they were super keen to be in the leadership group and then they start not showing up and feeling like, you know, that can signal that something's not right.
Mm-hmm. And what would you do at that point?
Assuming that I would have built a relationship with that young leader from the beginning, then I would reach out.
Right. Right. So all of the examples that you're giving is about making them feel like a part of something, but then recognizing when they're feeling like they're not themselves anymore. that something's happened where they've shifted somehow, and it's about connecting and communicating. And the reason I'm highlighting these stories is because it's no different. You can put whatever label you want at the end outcome, but I want you to all feel comfortable that what you do on a day-to-day basis is exactly what's needed, and you're doing the right thing by reaching out, by connecting, by making them feel good. Don't get confused or don't get scared by, you know, this whole label of violent extremism or terrorism or whatever it is. It's really, you're trying to, the reason we're all in this, in the fields that we are, is be able to help people to be happy in their lives and productive. It's no different. Does that make sense? If a child starts coming in, like I know my kids do this sometimes. Jordan, not so much because he's 10 and he's still kind of on the periphery, although he hears the news. My daughter, who's 14, you know, with the Paris attacks, for example, when all that was happening, you know, she had questions about it, and she was either afraid, you know, and there's news stories of Muslim kids feeling afraid with things that were happening to some Muslim women across the city or across, you know, in the country, like in Toronto or wherever, or in Montreal. And, you know, they had questions or they were concerned or, so it's about being comfortable in having those conversations and not being afraid to, I know that, you know, we get caught up in politically correct, and I'm glad that we're not. I'd rather be respectful and honest as opposed to trying to, because that's really where you're going to get the value in conversations. It's about understanding and hearing and listening. So even when these things happen, it's about having the conversations even up front if somebody doesn't come to you, because it is a part of their lives. It is a part of all the children's lives, whether they're Muslim or not. It's what's happening in the world, and it is bound to have an effect on them. It is bound for them to be afraid to go to a hockey game or to the Red Blacks game because they're not sure if there's going to be a bomb going off. I mean, as much as we think that kids don't absorb what's happening in the world, they certainly do. You know, when the elections are happening and we're hearing more and more about the different political leaders, and, you know, one of the stories that came out was that after 9/11, I think Prime Minister Trudeau was a substitute teacher. He was a teacher of sorts, and when 9/11 happened, he decided to have a conversation with the kids about what was happening as opposed to teaching about the curriculum, which is fantastic because, you know, as much as there's a curriculum and processes to follow, there's also real life that happens, and it's bound to have an impact on our kids. So it's about not being afraid to have conversations when these things happen, because guaranteed a lot of them are questioning it, feeling it, even if they may not be verbalizing what's happening. Yeah? You guys tired of listening to me talk?
Oh, you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, so let's watch another. I'm going to show you a DVD. Extreme Dialogue is a fantastic, fantastic resource. Not only do they have these video clips, but they actually have really cool teaching tips and of creating an us versus them kind of scenarios, the black and white thinking, challenging. And again, it's not about the radical mindset. It's about the black and white thinking. It's about the us and them categorization, and it really is great in creating that kind of environment so that you can then talk about it with the kids about how did it feel to feel like an outsider or things like that. So I'm going to play a clip. This is Damien's mom. Okay, she's going to be talking about what she saw from her perspective. So again, always remember that as much as it's about, you know, maybe the one child that may be having an issue, again, regardless of what that may be, it's also about recognizing that their networks are going to also be influenced, so keeping an eye out on their networks.
never thought I'd be watching videos of Syria, horrible images, with my nose pressed up to the screen, trying so hard, desperately, to see if you were there somewhere. I just needed to know you were okay. Davey, one of the favorite things I enjoyed was when your friends would come over, Christmas time, Easter, Halloween, and cover the whole table with every piece of candy I could find, make different colored frostings. We'd have music on. Everybody'd be smiling and laughing and decorating all the cookies. And then you'd start eating all the candy instead. You decided to become Muslim, and I remember how happy I was when you said, Mom, I want to go pray. You were smiling. You came out for coffee with me. That was a big deal. You weren't hiding in the basement or with a hoodie over your face to block yourself from the world anymore. 2 agents. They walked in, sat down, and asked questions about you. And I said that you were gone to Egypt to study. They explained at that time that they'd been watching you for almost 2 years. They thought that you'd gone over into Turkey to a training camp, a place where they train people to fight. I couldn't picture you fighting or holding a gun to kill anything or anyone. And they said from there, you would likely cross the border into Syria. Why would you tell me you're going to Egypt to study when you were really going somewhere to fight? I hadn't heard from you in a month. I didn't know if you were alive, and I became consumed with searching for you. And this is how I did it, in your room, watching every single YouTube video just to see your face, your eyes, that you were still alive. And I never did see you. How was I supposed to do anything when all I wanted to do is look for you and find you alive? The first time I talked to you, once you finally reached out to me, I asked you why. Your explanation to me was what was going on in the world was wrong, and nobody was helping them. They were being tortured, murdered, raped. You had to finally do something productive with your life, and so that you chose it to be to help save them. I remember you telling me, you can't guilt me into coming home. I didn't try to guilt you. Davey, we just wanted you to come home. I'd get so scared because you'd tell me that you had to run because an airplane was coming in. It was flying low. When they flew low, they dropped bombs. And you ran with these two little bones. And I couldn't stop talking to you. I didn't want to let go. It ate me up inside. on January 14th, 2014. I was sitting at the table doing some work. I wasn't expecting a reporter to introduce himself at that hour of the night. He said he had received a Twitter tweet with your picture. I went straight to my computer. I just sat there frozen, staring at the computer, reading your eulogy over and over again. The next morning, I took Luke to an appointment, and thank goodness I had somebody there when I had to break the news to him, because I don't think I could have done it on my own. All I could do was gather everybody up in the house, turn off the TV, and then the phone started ringing over and over and over again. Different journalists wanting to talk to me. At least once a week, I still see your photo in a newspaper on the TV. And every time that happens, I have to relive it. Here we are today. We have no body, no way of touching you one more time, no way to look at you and say goodbye. All we can do is try to find our own way to celebrate who you were. So we decided to write you a message, put them in balloons. We're going to let go of the balloons and let go of you. That's all we can do. That's all we have. We're just left in the dark. You wanted to help people. Why couldn't we find another way? How do I start understanding why you would leave us to fight, to hurt people? Why didn't you come home? Once you saw what it was, why didn't you come home? How do we live our life knowing some of the things that you may have done? Were you scared? When those final moments came, were you scared? You took away the opportunity for me to be there for you. Did you want me there? Did you want me just to hold your hand? Did you miss us? Did you truly think of us in those last moments? What were your last thoughts? How do we go on living every day? How do I know that you really truly knew how much I loved you? How do I live with those memories? What did all this have to do with God?
Any thoughts, questions? You know, when you're talking about, in terms of if you have kids coming in talking about what's happening around the world and wanting to do something, wanting to be a bigger part of something, just like he was saying, just like Damien was saying, there are also opportunities to create bigger things within the clubhouses, within what you do, that are nonviolent, that are helping, whether it's raising funds, whether it's being part of writing a letter campaign, whether it's reaching out to other, whatever it may look like, there are also opportunities to create something bigger for them to feel like a part, to be a part of when these things are happening around the world as a thought. So as much as it's great that your clubhouses offer a place to belong and feel accepted, which is wonderful, when these things happen, there's an opportunity for dialogue and there's an opportunity to do something collectively as well. I do have a request, if I may.
Yeah,
Yep.
I just wanted to, I know that people may have other plans, so if you need to time out, that's fine, and I'll just let you wrap up, Tasleem.
Yep. So my request is if you're comfortable in, whoever's comfortable in sharing their contact information in terms of where you belong, in terms of the organizations with Rachel, if she can share them with me, because sometimes I do get calls from across the country of families or looking for places where the kids can go to and belong to different organizations where they can actually feel like they belong instead of going down a path. So if you're comfortable with that, if you can provide that to Rachel, she can provide me with a list. So if I get a call from somebody, I can say, hey, go and join, you know, the Boys and Girls Club or the Big Brothers and Big Sisters in X city, and they will be accommodating if you guys are comfortable with that. Other than that, that's all I wanted to say was thank you. I'm always available for questions.
I have all that list already, so I'm happy to send it your way. Does anyone have any questions for Tasleem?
I don't. Should I take it off mute? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I don't have a question. I have a comment. I'm still shook up by that video. It's heartbreaking.
Yes.
So I just need to debrief, I think, a bit about it.
Okay.
I thought my biggest trigger point was children who, you mentioned earlier in the conversation about child abuse and abuse, grooming our children for abuse, and I thought that was my biggest trigger, but this is heartbreaking as well.
Yes.
And the work that happens in the ground floor of Boys and Girls Clubs is just crucial to,
yes,
because I had no true understanding of the radicalization of young people and how the process worked and all of that, because it's much more. I know it's tied into religion, I understand that, but it's not. There's so many other factors involved as well. Thank you for showing that video.
No, you're welcome. Thank you for caring enough to learn about it.
Thank you, Tasleem, for donating your time like this. I owe you a coffee. And
Coffee's not necessary, but I always love connecting.
And sprinkles and everything. Yeah, so like the $6 coffee.
Just such a waste of money.
And I'll send you Tasleem's email address. Let me just stop recording this because probably that's not on. I don't know how to stop recording this. Anyways, okay, so this will be on the recording. The information, okay, so Tasleem has provided information. I've started putting it into a Dropbox folder, so I will share the link to that folder with everybody, Tasleem's contact information, and it'll have the video recordings and all that and resources. So thank you, Tasleem, and I'll see you in the coming week. I'll reach out.
Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much.